What would you do if someone looked your child in the eye and told them they didn't belong, simply because of the color of their skin? Picture a little girl, dressed in her Sunday best, holding her ticket with excitement, ready for her very first journey in first class. And then, in front of everyone, a flight attendant leans down and says, "This seat isn't for you." It wasn't about a ticketing mistake. It wasn't about policy. It was about prejudice. Now pause for a moment. If you were that parent, what choice would you make? Stay quiet to avoid a scene, or rise up to protect your child's dignity? Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The little girl's father wasn't just another passenger. He was the man who owned the very airline that tried to humiliate her. His decision in that moment would ripple far beyond one flight. It would challenge an entire system of bias hiding in plain sight. So I'll ask you again, if justice depended on your voice, would you remain silent, or would you stay with us? Because what unfolds next will move you deeply. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. Naomi Pierce held her boarding pass with both hands, the way a child might carry something fragile, like a seashell collected at the beach. She was 12, tall for her age, with long braids that swayed against the straps of her backpack. It was a summer evening at Chicago O'Hare, the terminal full of the usual hum-rolling suitcases, last-minute announcements, and the impatient sighs of travelers waiting to board. This wasn't her first flight, but it was the first time her father had let her hold her own ticket. She traced the bold letters printed on the paper: Aerovista Airlines, Flight 417 to Los Angeles, Seat 1A. She whispered it to herself like a little mantra. Seat 1A, first class. The boarding line inched forward. Naomi clutched the handle of her small roller bag, trying not to smile too wide. She wanted to look calm, like the grown-ups around her, but her excitement flickered through every step. At the entrance to the jet bridge stood Catherine Doyle, the lead flight attendant for this flight. Catherine had worked with Aerovista for 20 years. Her uniform pressed so sharply it seemed to cut the air around her. Her smile, though, was tight, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. She greeted each passenger with a quick welcome aboard before directing them left to first class or right to economy. When Naomi reached the doorway, she extended her boarding pass. Catherine scanned it, her eyes narrowing. She looked from the ticket to the girl, then back again. The smile vanished. "Sweetheart," Catherine said, her voice pitched like someone correcting a mistake, "I think you're in the wrong line. First class isn't for this. Economy is down that way." She gestured toward the right side of the plane. Naomi froze. For a moment she thought she had misunderstood. She looked at the pass again. Seat 1A, she pointed to it gently. "It says here, first class." Catherine chuckled softly, the way adults sometimes do when they believe a child has said something silly. "I'm sure there's been a mix-up. These seats are reserved for executives, business travelers." Not she stopped short, eyes lingering on Naomi's skin tone, her braids, her simple summer dress from Target. Not for little girls traveling alone. The words landed like pebbles thrown into Naomi's chest. Passengers behind her shifted impatiently. Someone cleared their throat. She felt the weight of strangers watching, waiting for her to move aside. Her cheeks warmed. She held out the boarding pass again, firmer this time. "My dad booked this seat for me." Catherine's smile thinned into irritation. "Honey, you don't have to pretend. Let's not hold up the line. Just go find an open row in the back. You'll be more comfortable there anyway." A man in a suit behind Naomi sighed loudly. Come on, kid. Some of us have connections to make. Naomi's throat tightened. She wanted to say something sharp, something strong, but the words tangled inside her. She stepped slightly to the side, clutching her bag handle like it was the only solid thing in the world. Her eyes darted toward the jet bridge, hoping to spot her father. Jonathan Pierce had stopped a few feet behind to answer a quick call. She could see him now, tall and steady, slipping his phone back into his jacket. Relief flickered through her until Catherine leaned down again. "Look, sweetheart," Catherine whispered in a tone meant only for Naomi. Though the sharpness carried, "These seats have a certain atmosphere. You wouldn't understand. Let me help you find where you really belong." Naomi's stomach dropped. She didn't know what to say. The ticket in her hand suddenly felt heavier, like it was turning into stone. The man behind her muttered again. Unbelievable! Someone else lifted a phone. Recording. The tension thickened in the air like humidity before a storm. Naomi straightened her shoulders, the way her father always told her to when she felt small. "This is my seat," she said quietly. Though her voice trembled, Catherine's brows knit together. She reached as if to take the pass from Naomi's hand, her polished nails catching the light. "Let me hold on to that, sweetheart. We'll sort this out. Economy's just down the aisle." At that moment, Jonathan Pierce stepped forward, his presence quiet but commanding. He rested a hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. "Is there a problem here?" he asked evenly, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the air shift. Catherine straightened, suddenly aware of the tall man beside the girl. She forced another smile, but the strain showed. "Oh, no problem, sir. Just a mix-up with seating." Naomi looked up at her father, eyes wide and glassy. She didn't need to say a word. The pain was written all over her face. Jonathan's gaze moved from his daughter to Catherine, holding there a moment too long. His eyes were unreadable, steady, unblinking, as if measuring not just what had been said, but the intent behind it. "Are you sure about that?" he asked softly. The boarding line had stalled completely now. Dozens of passengers waited, some annoyed, some curious, several with phones angled discreetly toward the scene. The hum of the terminal seemed to fade, leaving only the sharp silence between the three of them. The girl with the ticket, the flight attendant with her assumptions, and the father whose identity no one yet suspected. Naomi squeezed the ticket in her hand until the edges bent. All she had wanted was to sit in seat 1A and read her book as the clouds rolled by. Instead, she was standing here, forced to defend her right to belong. Catherine's smile wavered, but she kept her posture stiff. "Of course. If you'll just step aside, we'll make sure everything is in order." Jonathan didn't move. His hand stayed steady on Naomi's shoulder. His voice was low, calm, but the calmness felt like the still surface of deep water. "Then let's be certain," he said. And with that, the first crack appeared in what Catherine had always believed was an unshakable authority, the kind that could decide, with a smile and a gesture, who belonged in first class and who did not. The journey had only just begun. Jonathan Pierce kept his hand on Naomi's shoulder, steadying her as Catherine Doyle's words still hovered in the charged air. The passengers in line shuffled uncomfortably, murmurs rising. Naomi's small fingers clenched the boarding pass until the edges crumpled, the ink smudging faintly beneath her grip. She kept her eyes low, not because she was ashamed, but because looking up meant meeting the stares of strangers who were silently judging whether she belonged in that aisle at all. Jonathan lowered his voice, speaking only to his daughter. "Take a breath. Naomi." His tone was calm, almost soothing. She did as he said, inhaling and exhaling slowly, though her chest trembled. He crouched slightly so that his face was level with hers. "This ticket says 1A. That means 1A is yours. Do you understand?" She nodded, her eyes glistening. When he rose again, his presence seemed taller, his shoulders broader, the stillness of his composure demanding attention. Catherine shifted her weight, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes fixed on her. She smoothed the front of her jacket. "Sir, I was only trying to prevent confusion." We often have passengers who she paused, searching for words that would soften the intent, who accidentally board the wrong section. Jonathan studied her expression, every flicker of hesitation. His voice was quiet, but carried. "You looked at her ticket. You saw the seat assignment. And still, you told her she did not belong. Is that what you call confusion?" The silence pressed in tighter. Even the man in the suit who had been impatient moments ago now looked uneasy, his phone half raised but forgotten. Catherine straightened again, the corners of her lips forced upward in a brittle smile. "These are standard procedures. First class is a unique space. It requires decorum." Naomi's head tilted slightly toward her father. She whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Daddy, she thinks I'm not good enough." The words were like a pin slipping into his chest. Jonathan's gaze softened as he looked at his daughter, but when he turned back to Catherine, his eyes were firm again. "Decorum?" he repeated. "I see." The boarding line had stalled completely. A younger flight attendant at the end of the jet bridge called out nervously, "Ms. Doyle, maybe we should let them through and—" But Catherine cut her off with a sharp glance. Jonathan placed the boarding pass back into Naomi's hand, covering her fingers with his own. "Seat 1A is hers. We will take it now." Catherine hesitated. She felt something shifting, though she couldn't yet name it. The authority she had wielded so easily for 2 decades, the power to decide, with a glance, who belonged in premium spaces and who didn't, suddenly felt fragile. She cleared her throat. "Of course. Please, this way." She stepped aside stiffly, her hand motioning toward the first-class cabin with a reluctance that did not go unnoticed. Jonathan nodded once, and together he and Naomi walked down the aisle. Passengers' eyes followed, some with sympathy, others with curiosity, a few with judgment. Naomi felt every gaze like a weight on her shoulders. She clutched her book close, wishing only to disappear into the soft leather of the seat that awaited her. When they reached row 1, seat A gleamed like a promise. Naomi slid into it cautiously, her backpack at her feet. Jonathan stored her bag in the overhead bin, then leaned down and whispered, "This seat is yours, and you will sit here with dignity. Don't let anyone take that from you." She nodded, pressing her lips together, her small chin lifting slightly. Jonathan settled into the seat beside her, but his eyes never stopped scanning the cabin. He noticed Catherine whispering with another attendant at the galley, her posture rigid, her voice clipped. A few passengers across the aisle murmured, 1 or 2 still recording discreetly. The incident wasn't over. It had simply shifted into a new stage. As the last passengers boarded, Catherine moved up the aisle again. She stopped near Naomi's seat, her smile frozen in place. "Would you like something to drink before takeoff?" she asked in a tone that was polite but sharp at the edges. Naomi shook her head. Jonathan met Catherine's eyes. "She's fine," he said simply. There was no anger in his voice, but the control in it left no room for argument. The plane taxied and lifted into the evening sky. The engine's roar filled the cabin, but within the cocoon of first class, the noise felt distant. Naomi opened her book, trying to disappear into the printed words, but the letters blurred. She could still hear Catherine's voice replaying in her mind. Not for you. Not for little girls like you. Jonathan noticed. He placed a hand gently over hers, closing the book. I know you're trying to escape into that story, he said softly. But this moment, hard as it is part of your story too, you'll remember it one day, and you'll remember how you chose to carry yourself. Naomi looked at him, her eyes searching. But why does it always have to be this way, she asked. Why do people look at us and think we don't belong? Jonathan inhaled slowly. The kind of breath a man takes when he has carried the same question for a lifetime and never found a simple answer. Because some people are taught to measure worth by things that have nothing to do with character or heart. Skin, hair, clothes, names. But those measures are lies. Naomi, they have nothing to do with who you are. He paused, then added, What matters is how you respond when someone tells you that you don't belong. That is where your true power lies. She nodded, but the sadness lingered in her eyes. She leaned against his arm, closing her eyes, her body seeking the comfort of his steadiness. For the rest of the flight, Catherine performed her duties, but every glance she cast toward row 1 carried a stiffness. She sensed that her decision at the boarding door would not vanish quietly. Something in Jonathan's calm presence unsettled her. She didn't know who he was, but she knew she had stepped into something larger than a routine boarding dispute. When the plane touched down in Los Angeles 3 hours later, Jonathan helped Naomi gather her things. As they stepped into the terminal, flashes erupted, phones raised, cameras clicking. A stranger whispered loudly, "That's the girl from the video." Jonathan glanced at Naomi, shielding her gently with his arm as reporters surged forward. Somewhere, the clip of Catherine denying her first-class seat had already found its way online. In the age of instant connection, injustice didn't stay confined to a single aisle on a single plane. It spread like wildfire. Naomi gripped her father's hand, her small voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I didn't do anything wrong." Jonathan looked down at her and answered with a quiet certainty. "No, sweetheart, you didn't, and the world is about to learn that." The video spread faster than the plane had flown. By the time Jonathan and Naomi left the terminal in Los Angeles, snippets were already climbing onto social feeds. Shaky footage of a young black girl being told to move to economy. The sharp voice of Catherine Doyle. And the moment a tall man stepped into frame, steady and quiet. Clips no longer than 15 seconds became fuel for outrage. The hashtags rose dash receipt for Naomi. Berpice flying while black. Arch dignity in the sky. Jonathan said little that night. He ordered room service for Naomi, helped her settle into the hotel, and when she finally fell asleep with her book still open across her chest, he sat by the window staring at the glowing city. He had lived through prejudice and quiet corners his whole life, but now it wasn't just about him. It was about his daughter, her innocence pierced before she even had a chance to grow into the kind of armor he had been forced to wear. Meanwhile, at Aerovista's headquarters in Chicago, messages poured into the customer service lines. Journalists called relentlessly. Executives exchanged frantic texts long past midnight. The airline had dealt with complaints before, but never with a storm so public, so personal. They didn't yet realize the man in the video was their own CEO. On the following morning, another clip surfaced. It hadn't come from the front of the line, but from a passenger seated a few rows back during boarding. The footage showed not just Catherine, but also the reactions of those nearby. In it, a middle-aged man in a gray blazer stepped forward as Catherine blocked Naomi's path. His voice was measured, but clear. "She has a valid ticket. I saw it. You can't treat her this way." His name was Robert Hall, a civil rights attorney known in legal circles but not widely recognized outside of them. In the clip, he placed himself between Naomi and Catherine, only to be dismissed with a sharp, "Please, sir, stay out of this." His insistence, combined with the girl's trembling voice saying, "This is my seat," added layers to the narrative. The public saw not just a child being denied her place, but also a witness standing up against it. Robert hadn't planned on becoming part of a viral story, but as he watched his name trend alongside the Pierces, he knew silence wasn't an option. Reporters called, and finally he agreed to speak. It wasn't about celebrity. He said, it wasn't about status. It was about a child with a ticket, being told she didn't belong. That should outrage anyone who believes in fairness. Back in Los Angeles, Naomi scrolled through her phone cautiously. She wasn't supposed to check social media alone, but curiosity had pushed past her father's gentle rules. She saw her face frozen in countless thumbnails, strangers typing comments about her. Some messages were supportive, full of encouragement and anger on her behalf. Others, darker, suggested she was exaggerating or her father must have bought her privilege. She bit her lip, her chest tightening as she whispered, "Why do people hate someone they don't even know?" Jonathan took the phone from her hand gently and closed it. "Because it's easier for them to project their fears than face their own reflection," he said. He didn't raise his voice, but each word carried weight. Naomi leaned into him, silent, absorbing the gravity of his presence. While father and daughter tried to find a pocket of peace, another figure wrestled with the fallout in her own way. Catherine Doyle sat in her small apartment on the north side of Chicago, blinds half closed, phone buzzing with endless notifications. She hadn't been suspended yet, but the calls from supervisors were sharp, urgent. She had worked 2 decades in the skies, prided herself on order and discipline, and now the world saw her as a villain. She replayed the footage, her own voice sounding harsher than she remembered. At first, she muttered excuses, procedures, miscommunication, but slowly, uncomfortably, she began to sense that no explanation could untangle what the camera had captured. Her teenage son knocked on her door. "Mom, why are they calling you racist on the internet?" She froze, unable to answer. The weight of the question pressed harder than any corporate memo ever could. Elsewhere, among the crew of Flight 417 Eleanor Brooks, the young attendant who had tried to interject, sat at her kitchen table, drafting an email she wasn't sure she would ever send. She had seen Catherine's face tighten, had heard Naomi's trembling voice, and felt the wrongness in her gut. Eleanor was new, still on probation, and speaking out could end her career before it even began. But watching the story explode online, she realized her silence would be another wound. She saved the draft, promising herself she would decide tomorrow. By the 3rd day, Aerovista executives convened in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Chicago skyline. Their voices overlapped damage control, press statements, legal exposure. Some argued to discipline Catherine quietly, release a sanitized apology, and move on. Others feared any strong action would appear as admission of systemic bias. They still didn't know the CEO was directly involved. Jonathan hadn't stepped into the room yet, and without him, the leadership floundered. In Los Angeles, Jonathan prepared to return with Naomi to Chicago. Before boarding, he received a message from Robert Hall. The attorney suggested they meet, not for publicity, but to discuss the deeper issue. This isn't just about one flight, Robert wrote. It's about the silent rules in the system. Jonathan agreed. That evening, Naomi sat across from Robert in a quiet café, the clinking of cups and soft jazz wrapping their conversation. She listened as the attorney spoke not to her father, but directly to her. What happened to you isn't fair, but you have something powerful, your truth, your voice. When people try to silence that, you must keep speaking. That's how things change. Naomi nodded slowly. Her young eyes carried an old wisdom, born not from choice, but from necessity. Jonathan watched the exchange, pride mixing with sorrow. He knew Naomi's childhood had shifted in those few minutes at the boarding gate. She could no longer see the world with the same innocence, but he also knew she carried a resilience that could bend injustice without breaking. Later that night, when Naomi asked, "Will Catherine lose her job?" Jonathan hesitated. He thought of Catherine's rigid smile, her brittle authority, and her son's innocent question. Finally, he answered, "That depends not only on what the company decides, but on whether she chooses to face what she's done. Accountability is not just punishment, it's an opportunity to change. We'll see if she takes it." Naomi rested her head against his chest. "I just don't want this to happen to another kid," she whispered. Jonathan held her close, his mind already shaping plans, not as a father alone, but as a leader of an entire airline. The storm outside was still building, but he knew that silence was no longer an option. The moment was approaching when he would have to step forward, not just as Jonathan Pierce, father of Naomi, but as the man who held responsibility for Aerovista itself. Chicago's skyline glimmered in the distance as the company car carried Jonathan and Naomi back from the airport. Inside the glass towers of Aerovista's headquarters, the board was still in crisis mode. News outlets had run the story for 3 straight days, and now cable commentators argued late into the night about whether the incident revealed the true face of the airline industry. Jonathan listened to the hum of the city as his daughter rested against him, eyes heavy with exhaustion. He knew the moment he stepped into headquarters tomorrow, the quiet storm he had carried within him would finally have to break. That night, Naomi sat cross-legged on the hotel bed, flipping through a notebook she had been writing in since she was 9. She drew a sketch of the boarding gate from memory, Catherine blocking her path, her own small figure clutching a ticket, Robert Hall stepping forward. She shaded the background with jagged lines, capturing the tension she hadn't been able to name. When Jonathan entered, she held up the drawing. "Is this what it looked like to you, too?" she asked. Jonathan studied it carefully. "Yes," he said softly. "You captured more truth than the cameras did." At the same time, across the city, Catherine Doyle sat alone with her union representative. The apartment smelled faintly of burnt coffee. The representative leaned forward, papers spread out across the table. "You're facing termination, Catherine. The company is under fire, and they'll need someone to take the fall." Catherine's throat tightened. "So that's it. 20 years in the air. And I'm discarded because of one incident." Her voice wavered between anger and fear. The rep shrugged. "The public won't forgive what they saw. The only question is whether you go down fighting or cooperate quietly." But Catherine couldn't quiet the gnawing in her chest. She replayed the words she had spoken to Naomi, how sharp they sounded in the recordings. She thought of her son's eyes when he asked why strangers online called her racist. She had told herself for years she was just upholding standards. Now, for the first time, she wondered if those standards had been poisoned all along. Meanwhile, Eleanor Brooks finished her unsent email and pressed send before she could change her mind. The message was short but powerful. I was present on Flight 417. I witnessed the treatment of Naomi Pierce. It was discriminatory. I want my testimony on record. She stared at the screen after it went through, fear coursing through her veins. She had just wagered her entire career, but for the first time since that night, her chest felt lighter. The next morning, Jonathan walked into the towering lobby of Aerovista headquarters with Naomi by his side. Whispers rippled through employees as they recognized her, the girl from the video, the girl whose story had shaken the company. Security guards straightened. Receptionists fumbled their greetings. Naomi held Jonathan's hand tighter, chin lifted just slightly higher. She wasn't going to be invisible again. Inside the boardroom, the tension was thick. 12 directors sat around a long mahogany table, eyes darting toward Jonathan as he entered. Some looked relieved, others wary. Richard Morrow, the CFO, was the first to speak. "Jonathan, the situation is unsustainable. Lawsuits are piling up. Investors are nervous. We need a public statement stronger than what communications drafted." Jonathan nodded, but didn't sit. "You'll get a statement, but first, you'll get the truth." He gestured toward Naomi, who reluctantly stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. "I had a ticket. I just wanted to sit in my seat. But she told me I didn't belong there. She didn't see me. She saw something else." She stopped, pressing her lips together. That hurt more than I can explain. The room was silent. Board members who had argued in circles for days now stared at a child who had just captured the heart of the entire crisis. Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Naomi's story is not unique. It is simply the one that finally broke through. And as CEO, I cannot allow it to be dismissed as an isolated incident." One director, a gray-haired man named Everett Lang, leaned forward. "Are you saying this company has tolerated systemic discrimination?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I'm saying this company has tolerated cultures that allowed passengers like my daughter to be treated as though they were invisible. And that ends now." He outlined immediate steps: an independent audit of all past complaints, accelerated bias training, and the creation of a permanent passenger dignity office, staffed not by corporate insiders but by outside advocates. He didn't soften the blow. It will be expensive. It will be disruptive. But the cost of inaction is higher. This is not just a PR crisis. It is a moral one. The board erupted with questions, some supportive, others alarmed. Richard Morrow pressed the financial risks. Sandra Lee, a marketing director, argued that the airline's brand might recover faster with a quieter approach. But Jonathan didn't waver. "If we act quietly, we will fail loudly. If we act boldly, we will not only survive, but lead." Later, in his office, Jonathan received a call from Robert Hall. The attorney's voice was steady but urgent. "Jonathan, you need to know this isn't just about Aerovista anymore. Other passengers are coming forward with similar stories from multiple airlines. This could turn into a nationwide reckoning." Jonathan exhaled slowly. "Then it's time we lead that reckoning." At that very moment, across town, Mitchell Graves, CEO of Atlas Airways. Aerovista's fiercest competitor smiled as he watched the news on his office television. "Perfect," he murmured to his deputy. "While Aerovista drowns itself in social experiments, we'll position Atlas as the airline of stability." He didn't yet know that a single folder sitting on Catherine Doyle's kitchen table contained memos and training scripts that implicated more than just Aerovista. If revealed, they could drag the entire industry into the storm. That evening, Jonathan and Naomi walked along the riverfront in Chicago. the city lights shimmering across the water. Naomi's small hand clutched his sleeve. "Dad, when you spoke today, you sounded strong. But are you scared?" Jonathan smiled faintly. Every leader who tells you they're not scared is lying. The question isn't whether you're scared. It's whether you let fear decide for you. Naomi thought about that as the riverboats glided past. She still didn't understand why she had been denied her seat. But she understood something new. Her voice mattered, and tomorrow she would use it again. The next week unfolded like a tightening coil. Every day brought another headline, another clip of outrage, another analysis from commentators who had never set foot in the boardroom, yet spoke with certainty about what AeroVista should do. For Jonathan Pierce, the challenge was no longer just responding to a scandal. It was shaping the company's survival while carrying the weight of his daughter's trust. On Monday morning, he walked into a special session of the board that had been called under pressure from investors. The mahogany table gleamed under harsh fluorescent light. Jonathan stood at the head, no longer just the calm executive, but a man ready to confront his own team. Naomi wasn't with him this time. He wanted her spared from the ugliness that was about to unfold. Richard Morrow, the CFO, started first. "Jonathan, we respect your position as both CEO and father, but the financial fallout is catastrophic. Bookings for premium cabins are down nearly 20%. Analysts are already questioning whether AeroVista can recover. The market doesn't reward social crusades." Jonathan leaned forward, his palms resting flat on the polished wood. What the market doesn't reward is hypocrisy. Passengers saw a little girl denied her seat because she was black. Do you think they believe it happened only once? No. They see the reflection of a culture, and that culture will bury us faster than any boycott if we don't change it. Sandra Lee adjusted her glasses. "Change is fine, Jonathan, but your plan for external advocates, full audits, and passenger dignity officers, it's radical. It makes us look like we're admitting fault on a scale we can't contain." Jonathan's reply was calm but sharp. "We are admitting fault because it exists. Pretending otherwise is what got us here." A silence settled. Then Everett Lang, who had remained skeptical but attentive, finally spoke. "Jonathan, if you want us to gamble the company on this path, we need proof it works. Not just ideals data, projections, hard evidence. Investors aren't moved by emotion." Jonathan nodded. "You'll have the numbers. But understand this, if you want AeroVista to survive long term, you don't gamble on avoiding risk. You gamble on doing what's right. And what's right is rarely the comfortable choice." When the meeting ended, the directors filed out, divided some wary, others swayed. Jonathan stayed behind, staring at the empty seats around the table. The irony struck him. The fight was about a seat. And now, metaphorically, the entire company was battling over who deserved one at the table. Meanwhile, in her modest apartment, Catherine Doyle stared at the folder spread across her kitchen counter. Inside were years of memos, training manuals, even unofficial guidelines circulated among senior staff. One document instructed attendants to maintain premium cabin ambiance by watching for passenger profiles inconsistent with expected clientele. Catherine had never questioned it deeply before. Now, under the harsh glare of scandal, she saw the ugly subtext, inconsistent with expected clientele, a phrase that said so little yet meant so much. Her phone buzzed with another missed call from her supervisor. Catherine didn't answer. "Instead," she whispered to herself, "what have I done all these years?" For the first time in decades, she admitted aloud what she had avoided She had been part of something deeply wrong. Across town. Elna Brooks sat with Robert Hall in a quiet diner. She had reached out after sending her testimony, unsure if she'd made the right choice. The attorney listened as she explained her fear of retaliation. "You don't understand," she said. "In this industry, once you're labeled a troublemaker, you're finished. No airline will touch you." Robert sipped his coffee and leaned in. "Then let them finish you. And when they do, you'll find you weren't finished at all. You'll find you were freed. But Elena, your voice matters. You saw what happened. You have a chance to show the world that not everyone looked away." Tears welled in her eyes. She wasn't sure she was brave enough, but she also wasn't sure she could live with silence. Meanwhile, Naomi returned to school, where her classmates treated her differently. Some whispered behind her back. Others offered clumsy sympathy. A few asked for selfies, treating her like a celebrity. At lunch, she sat quietly until her best friend, Lila, nudged her. "You don't have to pretend it's okay," Lila said. Naomi blinked back tears. "I just want it to be normal. But now everyone looks at me like I'm a headline." That evening, Jonathan found her curled up in bed, sketchbook unopened. He sat on the edge and asked gently, "What's on your mind?" She whispered, "I didn't ask to be the face of this." Jonathan brushed her hair back. "No one asks. History decides for us sometimes. But you're not just a headline. You're Naomi, my daughter. And your story has power not because people talk about it, but because it's true." The following day, Jonathan convened a press conference, something he had resisted until now. Reporters crowded the hall, cameras flashing. When he stepped onto the stage, the room hushed. Naomi was not with him this time. This moment was his. "My name is Jonathan Pierce," he began, "and I am not only the CEO of Aerovista Airlines. I am also the father of the girl you saw in that video. The world has asked if our airline has a culture problem. The answer is yes. And I am here to say the culture ends today." Gasps rippled through the room. Executives rarely spoke so plainly. Jonathan pressed on. He outlined the reforms he had promised to the board independent audits, external advocates, new accountability measures. He didn't shy from the cost. "We will lose money. We will lose staff who cannot accept this new direction. But what we cannot lose is our soul." The reporters' questions came fast. "Are you admitting systemic racism at Aerovista? Will Catherine Doyle be fired? Are you afraid passengers will flee to competitors like Atlas Airways?" Jonathan met each question head on. Systemic bias thrives in silence. Today we break that silence. As for individuals, accountability will be fair but firm. And to passengers considering other airlines, I ask, do you want to fly with a company that denies what you saw with your own eyes, or with one willing to confront its own failures? The press conference ended with a standing ovation from some and harsh criticism from others. The stock price dipped another 5% that day, but social media ignited with renewed energy. For every critic calling Jonathan reckless, there were 10 praising his courage. That night, in the quiet of their hotel, Naomi whispered to her father, "When you spoke, it felt like you weren't just my dad. You were everyone's dad." Jonathan chuckled softly. "I'll settle for being yours. But if my words give someone else courage, then maybe we're on the right path." Back in his Chicago office, Mitchell Graves watched the press conference replay with narrowed eyes. His deputy muttered, "He's making it about morality. Dangerous move." Mitchell smirked. "Or brilliant. But brilliant doesn't always survive the market. Let him play hero. We'll play survivor. And when the dust settles, Atlas will own the skies. Mitchell didn't know that Catherine Doyle, shaken and restless, had finally decided to act. She picked up the folder of incriminating documents, tucked them into her bag, and whispered to herself, "If I'm going down, the truth is coming with me." The city was gray with drizzle when Catherine Doyle stepped out of her apartment carrying the folder that had haunted her for days. The documents inside weren't copies, they were originals. Years of quiet directives, unofficial notes from supervisors, and internal training scripts that exposed the rot festering under the polished exterior of Aerovista. For the first time in weeks, she felt strangely calm. She had told herself she was protecting her career, her reputation, her family. But those justifications had begun to sound hollow, even to her own ears. She boarded the train toward downtown. Her son's face still burned into her mind from the night he asked, "Mom, are you racist?" That question had pierced deeper than the media attacks, deeper than the union threats. She hadn't answered him because she didn't know. But today, she was going to try to give him an answer through action, if not words. Meanwhile, in Aerovista's headquarters, Jonathan Pierce was in a conference with his executive team. Charts and graphs littered the screen, declining bookings in premium cabins, a small uptick in economy, polarized customer sentiment. Richard Morrow spoke bluntly. "Jonathan, the press conference gained traction. Yes, but investors are restless. Atlas Airways is courting them aggressively. If this continues, they'll have the leverage for a hostile takeover." Jonathan remained composed, though fatigue shadowed his face. "Let them court," he said. "We aren't going to win this with short-term stock movements. We'll win it with long-term trust." Sandra Lee shook her head. "Trust takes years. Jonathan, investors don't wait years." The meeting ended with no easy answers. Tension thickened the air. Jonathan returned to his office, staring out at the drizzle streaking the windows. His reflection stared back at him, a man caught between duty to his daughter and responsibility to thousands of employees. For a fleeting moment, doubt pressed heavily on his chest. Was he dragging everyone into ruin? But then Naomi's voice echoed in his memory. "I just don't want this to happen to another kid." That reminder anchored him again. At that very moment, Catherine entered the lobby of Aerovista headquarters, clutching her folder. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw her. Catherine had become a recognizable face, her name a trending hashtag. Security moved toward her, but she raised her chin and said firmly, "I have evidence the CEO will want to see." 10 minutes later, Jonathan stood in his office as Catherine laid the folder on his desk. His jaw tightened. "Why bring this now?" he asked. Catherine's voice was low but steady. "Because I've spent years enforcing rules I never questioned. And because my son asked me a question I couldn't answer. Maybe this will help me find the answer." Jonathan flipped through the documents. Phrases leapt off the pages: maintain ambiance, profile inconsistencies, proactive prevention of incidents. He looked up, anger simmering beneath his calm tone. "Do you realize what you've brought me?" "Yes," Catherine whispered. "It's not just about me. It's the culture. It's the system. If you want to tear it down, here's where you start." Jonathan studied her. "You understand. Turning this over could implicate you too." Catherine gave a hollow laugh. "I'm already ruined. At least let me be ruined for telling the truth." That night, Jonathan shared the folder with Robert Hall. The attorney's eyes narrowed as he examined the memos. "This isn't just negligence. This is structured bias, written in careful corporate language. If this goes public, it's not just Aerovista, it's the entire airline industry that will come under fire. Jonathan knew Robert was right. This evidence could reshape aviation. It could also destroy Aerovista if mishandled. The choice was no longer just about reform. It was about whether to lead an industry reckoning or let Atlas and others bury the truth. While Jonathan grappled with the decision, Naomi had her own reckoning. At school the next day, a teacher asked if she would like to share her experience as part of a social studies lesson on civil rights. Naomi hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to relive the moment again. But as her classmates leaned forward expectantly, she realized this was her chance to speak on her own terms. "I didn't think I was different that day," she said softly. "I just thought I was a girl with a ticket. But when she told me I couldn't sit there, it felt like she wasn't talking to me at all. It felt like she was talking to the idea of me. Like she saw something I didn't put there. And that hurt." The classroom was silent. Even the fidgeting kids sat still. Naomi continued, "But I also learned something. People can record. People can argue. But the truth is how you carry yourself. My dad told me fear doesn't get to decide. I guess I'm learning what that means." Her words spread quickly after her teacher, moved by the moment, asked permission to share them. "Soon." Naomi's voice joined the online storm not as a victim, but as a child wise beyond her years. At the same time, Mitchell Graves watched from Atlas Airways' sleek headquarters. His analysts presented reports of Aerovista's declining numbers. "They're vulnerable," one advisor said. Mitchell steepled his fingers. "Then we move. We prepare the takeover bid. By the time Pierce realizes, it'll be too late." But Mitchell hadn't yet accounted for Catherine's folder. The documents now in Jonathan's possession would shift the ground beneath the entire industry. That evening, Jonathan sat with Naomi in their hotel suite. She showed him the clip of her classroom speech, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't mean for it to spread," she said. Jonathan smiled gently. "Sometimes the truth has a way of finding wings." He hesitated before speaking again. "Naomi, there are things in these documents that show this isn't just about one flight or one person. It's bigger, much bigger, and it's going to get harder before it gets better." Naomi looked at him, her young eyes steady. "Then we don't stop." "Right?" Jonathan pulled her close. "Right." The next morning, Jonathan called a special strategy session with Robert Hall and a select group of trusted executives. Catherine was there too, seated nervously at the edge of the table. For the first time, she wasn't defensive or combative. She was quiet, almost humbled. Jonathan placed the folder in the center. "This is the truth. It will hurt us. It will hurt others. But if we hide it, we become what they say we are. If we expose it, we may lose control, but we regain our soul." Robert leaned forward. "You understand, if this goes to regulators, to Congress, it becomes national. They'll dig into every airline. You'll be branded the whistleblower of the industry." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll be," Catherine whispered, almost to herself. "Maybe that's what we all should have been years ago." As the drizzle gave way to a cold, steady rain outside, the decision solidified in Jonathan's mind. The storm was no longer something to fear. It was something to harness. The rain finally broke, and with it came a morning of uneasy calm. Yet Jonathan Pierce knew it was only the pause before the storm. In his briefcase lay Catherine Doyle's folder, heavy with the weight of proof that could dismantle more than just Aerovista's reputation. It could unravel the airline industry itself. At dawn, Jonathan walked into his office earlier than usual. The city was barely awake, fog rising from the Chicago River. He set the folder on his desk and stared at it, fingers tapping lightly on the leather cover. A part of him wanted to lock it away, to pretend none of it existed, but that same instinct was what had kept these injustices buried for decades. He refused to be another link in the chain of silence. Robert Hall arrived not long after, carrying a thermos of coffee and a stack of legal pads. His presence was steadying, the way an anchor steadies a ship tossed by waves. "So," Robert said, taking a seat, "are you ready to set this free?" Jonathan let out a long breath. Ready, no, but prepared, yes. Before the day ended, Jonathan would have to brief the board. But first, he needed to know whether his daughter could withstand the storm that would follow. He called Naomi out of school early and brought her to the office. She perched on the leather chair opposite his desk, legs swinging, eyes curious. "Naomi," Jonathan began gently, "what happens next might make things louder. There may be more cameras, more questions, more people saying things about us that aren't true. I need to know how you feel about that." Naomi folded her hands, thoughtful beyond her years. "Dad, I didn't ask for this. But maybe the reason it happened to me is because I'm supposed to help. If telling the truth helps other kids, then I can handle it." Her words pierced him in a way no investor's critique could. He reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "You're braver than I ever was at your age." By midday, the board convened in the main conference hall. The folder sat in the center of the table, like an unspoken threat. When Jonathan opened it and began passing the documents around, murmurs erupted. Some directors skimmed the pages with shock, others with growing anger. Richard Morrow's face darkened. "If this leaks, we're finished." These aren't just bad optics. These are policies that suggest intent. Everett Lang's voice was measured but sharp. "Richard's right about one thing. This is dynamite. But maybe dynamite is what we need. Sometimes you don't renovate a crumbling house. You demolish it and build again." Sandra Lee, arms folded, shook her head. "You're suggesting we hand this to regulators. Do you have any idea the scrutiny that would follow? Atlas will seize the moment. They'll paint us as unstable, and passengers will flee." Jonathan didn't flinch. Passengers are already fleeing. Investors are already restless. The only path forward is through honesty. If we reveal this ourselves, we lead the conversation. If it leaks, we lose control forever. The debate stretched for hours, voices rising and falling. At last, Jonathan stood, silencing the room. "I will not preside over a company that buries the truth to save face. If you disagree, you may vote to remove me. But if I remain CEO, this folder will not stay locked in a desk drawer." The room fell quiet. Even Richard Morrow leaned back, eyes narrowing as if calculating the odds. No one moved to challenge him. For now, Jonathan's authority held. That evening, news crews gathered outside Aerovista headquarters. Jonathan stepped before the microphones, Naomi watching from the wings, her heart pounding. "Today," he began, voice firm but steady, "we are not just addressing an incident. We are addressing a culture. Documents recently uncovered show that policies and training at Aerovista have, intentionally or not, enabled discrimination. This stops now. We are releasing these materials publicly, and we are calling for a full industry-wide review of airline practices." Reporters gasped, shouting over one another. Cameras flashed. Some board members visibly winced. But Jonathan pressed on. "This will not be easy. We will lose money. We will face lawsuits, but we will also face ourselves. And in facing ourselves, we will change. The declaration shook the industry like turbulence. Within hours, regulators in Washington announced inquiries. Competitor airlines scrambled to issue statements distancing themselves from similar practices. Social media exploded. Some praised Jonathan as a visionary leader. Others derided him as reckless. In her apartment, Catherine Doyle watched the press conference on television. Tears streamed down her face, not of relief, not of joy, but of something heavier recognition. For the first time, someone at the top had admitted the truth she had been complicit in. She whispered into the quiet room, "Maybe now my son will know I tried to make it right." At Aerovista's rival, Atlas Airways, Mitchell Graves slammed his hand on his desk. "He's turning himself into a martyr." He snapped, "People eat that up. We need to move faster. If regulators dig into us, we can't afford skeletons crawling out of closets." His deputy, pale, shifted uneasily. "Mitchell, we have similar language in our manuals." If those surfaced, Mitchell cut him off, eyes blazing. "Then bury them, burn them, do whatever you have to. But Pierce is not taking this industry from me." That night, Naomi and Jonathan sat by the window of their suite, overlooking the city lights. Naomi leaned against him. "When you spoke today, it felt big, like more than us." Jonathan looked down at her, pride swelling in his chest. "Because it is. But never forget, big things start with small voices. Yours started it all." Naomi's lips curved into a small smile. For the first time since that awful day at the airport, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a force. Yet even as hope flickered in their hearts, Jonathan knew the storm was only beginning. The truth had taken flight, and once airborne, there was no turning back. The morning after Jonathan's explosive press conference, the world seemed to split into two camps. On one side, supporters hailed him as a pioneer who dared to name a system long whispered about but rarely confronted. On the other side, critics painted him as reckless, a CEO letting personal pain dictate corporate policy. The stock continued to slip, and with each point lost, pressure mounted. Inside Aerovista headquarters, the atmosphere was electric with both fear and urgency. Staff members clustered in hallways whispering about regulators, about layoffs, about whether the company could survive this. Jonathan strode through the corridors, his presence commanding but his eyes revealing fatigue. He had chosen this path knowingly, but that didn't make carrying its weight easier. Robert Hall joined him in his office, where stacks of media reports and legal notices had begun piling up. "They're coming at you from every angle," Robert said grimly. "Competitors are fanning the flames, investors are threatening lawsuits, and regulators are circling like hawks." "But Jonathan, you forced the conversation. That's what they can't forgive or ignore." Jonathan sank into his chair. "Forcing the conversation is one thing, Robert. Surviving it is another." While the corporate storm raged, Naomi found herself swept into her own version of it. At school, she overheard classmates repeating things they'd heard their parents say on television. "Her dad's going to ruin the airline," one boy muttered. "Bet they just want attention," said another. Naomi swallowed her hurt but didn't respond. That afternoon, she confided in Lila, her closest friend. "It feels like no matter what I do, people see me as the problem," Naomi whispered. Lila frowned. "You're not the problem. Naomi, you're the reason they're talking about fixing it. Don't let their words shrink you." That evening, Jonathan returned home to find Naomi sketching again. This time, her drawing showed two airplanes, one battered and cracking. another rising from its ashes like a phoenix. She didn't say a word when she handed it to him, but he understood. Across town, Catherine Doyle's world had grown quieter. Former colleagues had stopped calling. Her union representative had warned her she was finished in the industry. She knew she had made herself a pariah, but strangely, she felt lighter than she had in years. One night, her son sat beside her as she folded laundry. "Mom," he asked softly, "are you in trouble because you told the truth?" She paused, then nodded. "Yes, but sometimes trouble is the price of being honest." Meanwhile, at Atlas Airways, Mitchell Graves sharpened his knives. In a sleek boardroom overlooking Manhattan, he laid out his plan. Pierce wants to be the saint of the skies fine. Let him. Saints don't run companies. Survivors do. We're accelerating our takeover strategy. Investors are nervous. All we have to do is offer them certainty, and Aerovista will crumble into our hands. One of his deputies shifted uncomfortably. "But what about our own manuals, sir?" "If regulators look," Mitchell cut him off, his voice icy. "Then we make sure they don't look. Destroy anything questionable. Pierce may be naive enough to hand regulators a torch. We won't hand them fuel." Back in Chicago, Jonathan faced his own board. Richard Morrow slammed a hand on the table. "Jonathan, enough idealism. Investors are threatening to pull billions. If you don't reverse course, you'll tank us all. Do you want to be remembered as the man who burned down an airline? Over principles." Jonathan met his gaze evenly. "I want to be remembered as the man who didn't trade his daughter's dignity for stock points." Sandra Lee leaned forward, voice tight. "You've gone public with the documents. You've stirred regulators. Now Atlas is circling. Do you even have a plan for survival?" Jonathan rose from his seat, voice steady. "Yes, the plan is to lead, not cower. We'll implement reforms faster than regulators can mandate them. We'll make transparency our brand. Passengers will choose us not because we're perfect, but because we're honest." The room fell silent. It wasn't the kind of strategy they were used to, but it was one that carried conviction. That night, Jonathan walked the riverfront with Naomi. The lights shimmered across the water, the city alive with restless energy. Naomi tugged his hand. "Dad, do you ever feel like everyone wants you to fail?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "Every leader feels that way at some point. The question is, do you let them write your story, or do you write it yourself?" Naomi thought about that, her eyes reflecting the glow of the city. "Then we write it together." At that same hour, Catherine sat alone at her kitchen table, listening to the rain. She didn't know if Jonathan's gamble would succeed. She didn't know if her testimony would matter. But she whispered a quiet prayer that somehow, in the wreckage, something better would rise. And in New York, Mitchell Graves signed the first draft of Aerovista's takeover bid, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Pierce thinks he's fighting for justice," Mitchell muttered to himself. "But soon, he'll be fighting for scraps." What none of them realized was that the storm Jonathan had unleashed was already bigger than one company, bigger than one CEO. The truth had escaped its cage, and the skies would never look the same again. The storm Jonathan had predicted arrived with full force. Within a single week, Aerovista's stock plummeted to its lowest point in a decade. Cable news ran endless debates. Was Jonathan Pierce a visionary leader ushering in long overdue reform, or a reckless CEO dragging his company to ruin? In coffee shops and offices, passengers argued the same questions. The name Naomi Pierce became a flashpoint, a symbol of hope for some and resentment for others. On Tuesday morning, Jonathan sat in his office reviewing the latest reports when Robert Hall entered, his face grave. "The Department of Transportation has announced formal hearings," Robert said. "They're demanding testimony on systemic bias in the airline industry. And Jonathan, they want you and Naomi to appear." Jonathan's hands froze on the report. "Naomi, yes," Robert confirmed. "They want the human side, not just numbers. They want to hear her story in her own words." Jonathan leaned back, closing his eyes. He could protect her, shield her from further scrutiny, but at what cost? Naomi had already shown strength beyond her years. Was it right to deny her the chance to speak truth just to spare her father's fears? That evening, he told Naomi gently about the hearing. She listened quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. Finally, she said, "Dad, they didn't listen to me at the airport. Maybe if I speak now, they'll have to listen." Jonathan's chest tightened with pride and dread all at once. He nodded slowly. "If you're sure, I'll be with you every step." Meanwhile, Catherine Doyle sat across from federal investigators in a sterile conference room. Her hands shook as she handed over additional documents she had kept hidden even from Jonathan. One investigator asked, "Ms. Doyle, why now?" Catherine swallowed hard. "Because silence eats at you. Because I looked my son in the eyes and realized I'd taught him all the wrong lessons. I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can help stop it from happening again." Her testimony, combined with the documents Jonathan had already released, created a tidal wave. Regulators expanded their probe to include multiple airlines, Atlas Airways, despite Mitchell Graves' frantic efforts to cover its tracks, came under scrutiny as well. In his Manhattan office, Mitchell raged at his deputies. "We had a window, a perfect window, to destroy Aerovista, and now regulators are sniffing around us. How did Pierce turn this around?" His deputy spoke cautiously. "Because he leaned into the fire, sir, while we tried to hide. He made transparency his weapon. People may not trust airlines, but they're starting to trust him." Mitchell's face hardened. "Then we make sure they stop trusting him." Dig into his past, his business record, his family, whatever it takes. Everyone has a weakness. Back in Chicago, Aerovista employees gathered nervously in break rooms, watching Jonathan's press conferences and updates. To their surprise, many began to feel a cautious pride. For years, they had been told to protect the brand. Now, their CEO was telling the world the brand had been wrong and that honesty would replace silence. Some whispered that maybe, just maybe, Aerovista could survive by being the first to change. At school, Naomi prepared for her testimony by writing in her notebook. She practiced reading her words aloud to Lila, who listened intently. "Do I sound too nervous?" Naomi asked after stumbling over a sentence. Layla shook her head. "You sound like you, and that's what matters." The day of the hearing arrived. Washington buzzed with anticipation as Jonathan and Naomi entered the grand chamber. Cameras lined the walls, reporters scribbled furiously, and rows of senators and officials leaned forward, ready to question. Jonathan spoke first, delivering a calm but forceful account of the documents, the culture, the failure of oversight. He admitted fault, not only as a CEO but as part of a system that had looked away too long. Some senators grilled him harshly, accusing him of incompetence. Others praised his candor. Jonathan absorbed it all, steady as stone. Then it was Naomi's turn. She walked to the microphone, small in stature but immense in presence. The room fell silent. Her voice wavered at first, then grew stronger. "That day, I just wanted to sit in my seat. But when she said I didn't belong, it felt like I disappeared, like I was invisible. But I wasn't invisible. I was right there. And I don't want any other kid to feel like they don't exist." A hush swept over the chamber. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in on her determined face. Senators shifted in their seats, visibly moved. For a moment, the noise of politics and industry melted away, leaving only the voice of a 12-year-old girl demanding to be seen. Afterward, as they stepped out into the corridor, reporters swarmed them. Naomi clung to Jonathan's hand, overwhelmed but unbroken. One reporter shouted, "Naomi, do you think you changed anything today?" She paused, then answered softly, "I don't know, but I know I told the truth. And sometimes the truth is enough." That evening, news outlets across the nation replayed Naomi's testimony. Pundits debated its impact, but ordinary viewers responded with something more powerful: empathy. Parents hugged their children tighter. Passengers shared stories of times they too had felt unseen. The hashtag #IamNotInvisible began trending worldwide. In his office, Jonathan watched the coverage, Naomi asleep beside him on the couch. He felt exhaustion seep into his bones, but also a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. But not everyone was moved. Mitchell Graves stared at the same footage in his Manhattan penthouse, his face carved with fury. "She's a child," he muttered, "and yet she's dismantling an industry. If Pierce thinks this ends with sympathy, he's wrong. This isn't over." Back in Chicago, Catherine sat with her son, who had watched Naomi's testimony online. He looked up at his mother with wide eyes. "She's my age," he whispered. Catherine nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, and she's braver than I ever was. But maybe we can be braver too." The weeks following Naomi's testimony felt like a slow-motion earthquake at Aerovista. Every corner of the company seemed to shift, some cracks widening, some foundations strengthening. Headlines praised Naomi's courage, but inside corporate walls, doubt still lingered. Jonathan knew the storm wasn't over. Late one night, Jonathan sat in his office reviewing internal reports. A knock broke the silence, and Everett Lang entered, his expression troubled. "Jonathan, we need to talk. There's chatter among the board. Some members think your transparency is reckless. They're considering a motion to remove you as CEO." Jonathan leaned back, weary but unsurprised. "So Graves' poison is spreading." Everett hesitated. "It's not just Graves. Some shareholders are frightened. They see stock volatility, lawsuits piling up, and they want stability. They don't see reform as stability." Jonathan steepled his fingers. "Then we have to redefine stability." Meanwhile, Sandra Lee was cornered in the cafeteria by two mid-level managers. "You've been close to Pierce," one of them whispered. "Tell us honestly, is he sacrificing this airline for his social crusade?" Sandra bristled. "He's saving it. You just don't see it yet." But as she walked away, her heart pounded. She had defended Jonathan, but doubt gnawed at her too. Could Aerovista survive the weight of his vision? In Manhattan, Mitchell Graves plotted his next move with cold precision. His PR team had already seeded stories questioning Jonathan's competence as a leader. Now he wanted more. "Find me someone inside Aerovista willing to talk." Graves ordered, "Someone who'll say Pierce ignored operational realities. Money won't be an issue." It didn't take long. An anonymous article appeared in a major financial paper, quoting a senior executive at Aerovista who described Jonathan as obsessed with optics, blind to economics. The piece painted a portrait of a distracted CEO willing to burn shareholder value for personal vendettas. Investors panicked again. Aerovista stock dropping another 7% in 2 days. Robert Hall stormed into Jonathan's office with the article in hand. "This is sabotage. Jonathan, someone from inside is feeding Graves." Jonathan studied the article carefully. The details pointed to someone too close. His mind went immediately to Richard Morrow, the CFO, who had never hidden his disdain for Jonathan's reforms. That evening, Jonathan called Richard into his office. "I need to ask you directly," Jonathan said, his voice steady. "Did you speak to the press?" Richard's eyes flickered, but he forced a calm smile. "Jonathan, I may disagree with you, but I'm not foolish enough to betray my own company." Jonathan held his gaze for a long moment, searching for cracks. "If I find out otherwise, Richard, there will be consequences." The tension was interrupted by Naomi, who entered carrying her school backpack. "Dad, can we go home? You promised we'd have dinner together tonight." Jonathan softened immediately, rising to put an arm around her shoulder. "Of course, sweetheart." As they left, Richard watched them go, his expression unreadable. The next morning, Catherine Doyle faced her own reckoning. She had been called into a meeting with federal prosecutors. One of them slid a plea agreement across the table. "Ms. Doyle, if you testify fully about the discriminatory practices you participated in, you'll avoid prison time, but it will mean admitting, on the record, that you enforced those policies knowingly." Catherine's throat tightened. She thought of her son, of Naomi, of the shame she carried. She picked up the pen with trembling hands. "Then I'll admit it," she whispered. "All of it. No more hiding." When news broke of Catherine's deal, reaction was swift. Critics called her opportunistic. Supporters called her brave. For Jonathan, it was another double-edged sword. Catherine's confession strengthened their case for systemic reform, but fueled opponents claiming Aerovista was rotten to the core. Inside Aerovista headquarters, pressure mounted. Lawsuits were now numbering in the hundreds. Regulators hinted at possible fines in the billions. The board demanded an emergency meeting. Jonathan entered the boardroom to find the atmosphere charged. Richard Morrow sat stiffly, a folder of financial charts before him. Everett Lang looked uneasy. Sandra Lee avoided Jonathan's eyes. "Jonathan," Richard began coldly, "the numbers don't lie. We are hemorrhaging money. If this continues, Aerovista will be bankrupt within a year." Jonathan stood, projecting calm authority. "And if we abandon reform, what then? Do we survive another year, 2 years, only to collapse under the weight of the same corruption Graves is neck-deep in? No. We're not just fighting for Aerovista. We're fighting for the soul of this industry." The board erupted in debate, voices rising, accusations flying in the chaos. Everett suddenly spoke, his voice cutting through. "I visited a crew training last week. I saw employees confronting their biases, learning to serve every passenger with dignity. I saw something I hadn't seen here in years, Hope. If we abandon that, then we deserve to fail." Silence fell. Jonathan gave Everett a grateful nod. For the first time in days, he felt the balance shift slightly back in his favor. That night, at home, Jonathan found Naomi waiting with a drawing she had made a plane in the sky, with the words "Everyone belongs" written on its side. He felt tears sting his eyes. She had distilled everything into 3 words, words that carried more truth than any shareholder report. The next day, Aerovista received a surprising lifeline. A group of socially responsible investors announced their support, pledging new capital if Aerovista remained committed to reform. It was a sign that maybe, Just maybe, conscience and capital could align. But Jonathan knew Graves wasn't finished. Every victory seemed to sharpen his rival's determination. As Jonathan prepared for the next battle, he looked at Naomi asleep in her bed and whispered a promise into the quiet night. For you, for every child like you, I'll see this through. The winter winds swept across Chicago as Jonathan Pierce prepared for yet another press conference. His reflection in the mirror showed the tow lines deeper around his eyes, a weariness in his shoulders, but his gaze still carried the same fire. Naomi's drawing, the airplane with "Everyone Belongs," written boldly across its side, was pinned on the wall behind him. It reminded him daily of why he was enduring this relentless battle. Inside headquarters, tension hummed like a live wire. Reporters filled the lobby. Employees whispered nervously in corridors. Catherine Doyle's confession had ignited a national reckoning. Airlines across the country scrambled to review their practices, and Aerovista was both praised as a leader and attacked as a liability. Sandra Lee entered Jonathan's office with fresh poll numbers. Public sentiment is shifting, she said, laying charts across his desk. After Naomi's testimony, 59% of the public supports your reforms, but investors are split. Many still see Graves Atlas Airways as the safer bet. Jonathan scanned the data. Safety isn't the same as justice, he murmured, and sooner or later, investors will realize one without the other is temporary. Robert Hall walked in next, his expression grim. We've confirmed it. Someone leaked more documents to Graves. He's preparing a media blitz, claiming Aerovista knew about discriminatory practices for years and ignored them until it became personal. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Of course he is. Robert lowered his voice. We need to talk about Richard Morrow. Too many of the leaks match information only he would know. Jonathan nodded slowly. He'd suspected it, but hearing it from Robert made the betrayal cut deeper. Richard had been with Aerovista for decades. He knew its finances, its weaknesses. If he truly aligned with Graves, the damage could be catastrophic. Later that evening, Jonathan confronted Richard privately. The CFO didn't deny it. I did speak to them, Richard admitted coolly, because I refused to let you gamble away a century-old airline for your grand ideals. Jonathan stared at him, fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. You call it gambling. I call it survival. We cannot keep profiting from discrimination and expect to endure. History will bury us if we don't change. Richard folded his arms. History doesn't pay dividends. Investors do. And they're tired of your crusade. Jonathan stepped closer, his voice low but steady. If you undermine this company again, Richard, you won't just lose your seat at this table. You'll lose your reputation. Because when this transformation succeeds, and it will, you'll be remembered as the man who tried to stop it. Richard's expression flickered for the first time, a crack in his facade, but he said nothing. Meanwhile, Naomi was struggling in her own world. At school, some classmates celebrated her bravery, but others whispered cruelly. The girl who almost bankrupted an airline. One boy sneered. Lila defended her fiercely, but Naomi felt the sting. That night, she confided in her father. Dad, what if people hate me forever for what I said? Jonathan knelt beside her. Naomi, the truth doesn't always make you popular, but it makes you free. And someday, even those who doubt you now will see the difference you made. She nodded, though her young face carried the weight of a much older soul. Catherine Doyle, too, faced fallout. Online forums exploded with debates about her motives. Some called her courageous. Others accused her of self-preservation. At home, her teenage son struggled with the whispers from neighbors. One evening, Catherine found him sitting on his bed, staring at the floor. "Mom, why did you admit all that? Now everyone thinks you're the villain." Catherine sat beside him, her voice trembling but firm. "Because pretending I wasn't part of the problem would make me the villain forever. Owning the truth is the only way I can show you that change is possible, even if it costs me everything else." In Manhattan, Mitchell Graves prepared his counterattack. He launched a media campaign framing Atlas Airways as the airline for everyday Americans, affordable, efficient, colorblind. Ads splashed across television and social media, showing smiling passengers of every race boarding flights with slogans like, "We don't see labels, we see people." It was clever, Jonathan admitted when he saw the ads. Disingenuous, but clever. Graves wasn't denying discrimination. He was reframing himself as above the debate, appealing to those weary of the constant headlines. Robert Hall warned, "It's working." Some employees are questioning whether reform is worth this much pain. To combat it, Jonathan called an all-hands meeting streamed across every Aero Vista hub. He stood in front of thousands of employees, his voice steady, his message clear. "You may feel tired. You may feel attacked. But let me ask you this. When a passenger boards our plane, do you want them to feel fear or dignity? That's the choice before us. Not profit versus loss, fear versus dignity, and dignity always wins in the long run." The speech lit sparks among weary staff. Some wiped away tears. Jerome, a respected veteran attendant, later told reporters, "For the first time in years, I believe this company stands for something worth fighting for." But even as momentum grew, the shadows deepened. Anonymous threats began arriving at Jonathan's home. One letter scrawled in red ink read, "You can't protect her forever." He tightened security around Naomi, though he never told her the full extent of the danger. At the same time, the Department of Transportation announced that Aero Vista and Atlas would both undergo comprehensive audits. For Jonathan, it was an opportunity to expose Atlas practices, but also a risk if Aero Vista's past sins overshadowed their reforms. Late one night, Jonathan walked through the nearly empty terminal. Planes gleamed under fluorescent lights, preparing for dawn departures. He paused at a gate where a young black woman in a business suit was boarding. The flight attendant smiled warmly, checking her ticket without hesitation. For a fleeting moment, Jonathan saw the future he was fighting for, a future where that simple gesture wasn't remarkable, but normal. He whispered to himself, "We're not there yet, but we're closer than we've ever been." The day the auditors arrived, Aero Vista headquarters felt like a pressure cooker. Teams of federal officials in gray suits swept through the halls, carrying clipboards and laptops. They spoke in quiet tones, but their presence was thunderous. Jonathan Pierce walked them personally into the executive conference room, determined to face the process head-on. Robert Hall sat beside him, scanning the paperwork with the sharp eyes of a litigator. Across the table, Sandra Lee and Everett Lang watched nervously, while Richard Morrow remained aloof, his arms folded, gaze cold. The lead auditor, a stern woman named Margaret Klein, began with no preamble. "Mr. Pierce, we are here to determine whether Aero Vista's culture of bias is systemic and ongoing. You've admitted past failures, but our mandate is to examine whether discrimination persists today." Jonathan nodded firmly. "Then I welcome this audit, because if there's still rot in our system, I want it gone as much as you do." For the next hours, they grilled Aero Vista leadership. They demanded internal emails, training materials, crew performance evaluations. Catherine Doyle's confession loomed over every exchange. The auditors replayed clips from her sworn statement, pressing Jonathan to explain why such policies had been tolerated for so long. At one point, Richard Morrow leaned forward smoothly. "I think it's fair to say Mr. Pierce's reforms are aspirational, but the company must also prioritize solvency. Sometimes, ideals outpace reality." Jonathan's jaw tightened. Margaret Klein's eyes flicked between them. "Is that your view, Mr. Pierce?" Jonathan spoke clearly. "My view is this. An airline that cannot serve every passenger with dignity does not deserve to exist. Solvency without integrity is collapse in slow motion." The room went quiet. For a moment, even Richard had no retort. Meanwhile, Naomi tried to maintain a semblance of normal life, but the audit dominated every news cycle, and whispers followed her at school. Some classmates asked for selfies, treating her like a celebrity. Others avoided her, worried that association with her might draw unwanted attention. Lila remained her constant, reminding her to breathe, to laugh, to stay a kid despite the chaos. One evening, Naomi overheard her father on the phone with Robert, his voice low and tense. "If the audit reveals one more buried policy, we're done. Graves will feast on it." Naomi stepped quietly into his study. "Dad, are we going to lose everything?" Jonathan looked at her, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. He knelt, taking her hands. "We may lose the company, Naomi, but we won't lose ourselves, and that's what matters. At Atlas Airways." Mitchell Graves watched the audit unfold with predatory delight. He paced his penthouse, glass of scotch in hand. "This is it," he muttered. "The audit will bury him, and when it does, Atlas will be the only airline standing tall." But his smugness faltered when one of his aides rushed in. "There's a problem. An anonymous package arrived at the DOT office this morning. It contains documents, Atlas documents." Graves' face blanched. "What kind of documents?" "Training manuals, emails, passenger profiles flagged for enhanced scrutiny." Graves slammed his glass onto the table, shards flying. "Find out who leaked them. Now! Back at Aero Vista." Catherine Doyle met privately with Margaret Klein and the auditors. She revealed that she had also received copies of Atlas's discriminatory materials years ago at an industry conference. It wasn't just Aero Vista. She explained. The whole industry shared tactics. Quietly. Off the record. We normalized suspicion of certain passengers. We told ourselves it was about safety, but it wasn't. It was bias dressed as protocol. The auditors listened intently. Margaret's expression hardened. "Ms. Doyle, your testimony suggests this isn't a single company's failure. It's systemic." When word of Atlas involvement began leaking to the press, Jonathan realized the tide was shifting. Public outrage, once laser-focused on Aero Vista, began expanding to encompass the entire industry. Suddenly, his company was no longer the lone villain. It was the first to admit fault, the first to reform, the first to open its doors to scrutiny. He seized the moment. At a press conference, Jonathan stood before flashing cameras, Naomi by his side. "This audit should not be feared," he declared. "It should be embraced, because for too long, passengers have been treated unequally, and too often, their dignity has been denied. Aero Vista is not perfect, but we are proving that accountability is possible, and accountability is contagious." The speech electrified supporters and rattled competitors. Atlas Airways scrambled to issue denials, but leaked documents contradicted their statements. Graves doubled down, attacking Jonathan personally on national television. Pierce is a showman, not a leader. He's exploiting his own daughter's ordeal for sympathy. That is not leadership, it's manipulation. Naomi watched the broadcast at home, her fists clenched. Dad, why does he hate us so much? Jonathan sighed. Because when people feel threatened, they lash out, and Graves knows the truth threatens him more than anything else. Meanwhile, Aero Vista employees began feeling a cautious pride again. Flight attendants shared stories of passengers thanking them for treating everyone equally. Ground staff reported fewer complaints. A sense of purpose flickered in a place long clouded by fear. But beneath the progress, Jonathan sensed danger. Late one night, he received an anonymous email. No greeting, no signature, just 6 words. Graves isn't your only enemy inside. He stared at the screen, the words chilling him. Richard was already one known threat. But was there another, someone closer, as he pondered the betrayal within? Naomi tiptoed into his study, clutching a blanket. Can I stay here tonight? I had a bad dream. Jonathan pulled her close, letting her curl beside him on the couch. He whispered, more to himself than to her. Dreams can scare us, Naomi, but it's the waking betrayals that keep me up at night. The audit was far from over, and so was the battle. But in that quiet moment, with his daughter's head resting on his shoulder, Jonathan felt the fire in his chest burn stronger than fear. He wasn't just fighting for an airline anymore. He was fighting for her future and for a sky where no one would ever be told again that they didn't belong. The morning after the anonymous email, Jonathan Pierce walked into Aero Vista headquarters with a heaviness in his chest. The words echoed in his mind. Graves isn't your only enemy inside. He had already clashed openly with Richard Morrow. But this message suggested something darker. Someone else was feeding the fire. Robert Hall was waiting in his office, a stack of legal briefs under his arm. The auditors are digging deeper, he said. They want access to older employee files and closed-door disciplinary hearings. If there's anything buried, they'll find it. Jonathan rubbed his temples. Let them. We can't build trust on half-truths. But Robert... He hesitated, then added quietly, I need to know who else is betraying us. Not just for me, for Naomi. Every leak puts her more in the spotlight. Robert's jaw tightened. I'll look into it. Discreetly. That same day. Naomi found herself cornered at school. A girl shoved a phone in her face, showing a headline with her father's picture. Audit may ground Aero Vista forever. The girl sneered. Guess you'll be walking to your fancy summer houses now. Naomi's cheeks burned. Before she could answer, Lila stepped in, pulling her away. Don't listen to them, she whispered. They're just scared of your dad telling the truth. Naomi tried to believe that. But at home, she asked Jonathan a quiet question at the dinner table. Dad, if the airline disappears, does that mean you failed? Jonathan set down his fork. He looked into her searching eyes, then spoke carefully. No, Naomi. Failure would be knowing the truth and doing nothing about it. Even if Aero Vista vanishes, what we stand for will last. Catherine Doyle, meanwhile, was preparing for her public testimony before Congress. She sat at her kitchen table, rehearsing her statement. Her hands trembled as she read aloud. For years, I enforced policies that singled out passengers based on race, language, or perceived background. I knew it was wrong, but I stayed silent. Today, I speak because silence has cost too many their dignity. Her son listened from the couch. When she finished, he looked up at her with wide eyes. Mom, are people going to hate you after this? Catherine's voice cracked. Maybe. But if they do, At least it'll be for telling the truth instead of hiding from it. In New York. Mitchell Graves grew increasingly desperate. The leaked Atlas documents had thrown his empire into question. His legal team scrambled to contain the fallout, but new reports emerged daily. A former Atlas flight attendant went public with her own story of bias and humiliation. Graves slammed his fist on the table during a meeting. "This is Pierce's doing. He's behind the leaks." His deputy shifted nervously. "We don't have proof of that, sir." Graves glared. "Then find proof. Or make it." Back at Aero Vista. Sandra Lee paced outside Jonathan's office before finally entering. "Jonathan, I need to tell you something. Reporters have been contacting me directly, asking for dirt. Someone is feeding them inside info before board meetings even end. I don't know who it is, but they're close, every close." Jonathan nodded grimly. "Thank you, Sandra. That confirms what I already suspected." Later that night, Jonathan and Robert reviewed communication logs. They discovered encrypted emails routed through a proxy server messages that originated from inside Aero Vista, but ended up in Atlas's network. The sender used an alias Falcon. Robert leaned back, exhaling sharply. Whoever Falcon is, they're clever, and they have high-level access. Jonathan stared at the screen, which means they're sitting in my boardroom. The revelation gnawed at him. He had fought external enemies, faced down regulators, survived public storms, but betrayal within felt more dangerous than any of it. It meant someone was pretending loyalty while sharpening knives behind his back. Meanwhile, Naomi overheard fragments of conversation between her father and Robert. That night, she slipped into his study and asked softly, "Dad, is someone trying to hurt us from the inside?" Jonathan's first instinct was to shield her, but he saw the worry in her eyes. He chose honesty. "Yes, Naomi, someone we trusted is making this harder, but don't be afraid. The truth has a way of outlasting lies." She sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Then promise me one thing," she whispered. "Don't let them change who you are, even if it hurts." Jonathan felt a lump rise in his throat. His daughter's words carried the wisdom of someone far older than 12. He wrapped an arm around her, silently vowing he would keep that promise. Days later, the audit took a dramatic turn. Margaret Klein summoned Jonathan to a private session. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were memos signed by Richard Morrow from years earlier, approving enhanced scrutiny lists for first-class passengers. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice sharp, "these documents suggest your CFO actively maintained discriminatory practices well into your tenure. How do you explain this?" Jonathan's heart pounded. The proof was undeniable. Richard had not only sabotaged him in the present, he had orchestrated policies in the past that Jonathan was now fighting to dismantle. When the session ended, Jonathan confronted Richard directly. This time, there was no pretense. "It was you all along," Jonathan said, voice low and fierce. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed every passenger who trusted us." Richard smirked faintly. "You think dignity pays the bills I kept this company alive when you were still giving motivational speeches? If I have to be the villain in your little morality play, so be it." Jonathan stepped closer. "No, Richard, you're not the villain in my play. You're the proof of why it must exist." He turned and walked away, leaving Richard seething in the conference room. That night, Jonathan returned home exhausted. Naomi met him at the door, holding a new drawing. This one showed a bird in flight, breaking free of a cage. She smiled shyly. "I thought you might need this." Jonathan studied it, his eyes glistening. He didn't need to ask what it meant. She already understood. The storm was far from over. Graves was still plotting. Richard was still entrenched, and the auditors still had weeks of work ahead. But as Jonathan tucked Naomi into bed, he felt steadier than he had in days. The betrayal within had been exposed, and though it stung, it also cleared the path. The battle wasn't about one flight attendant, one girl, or even one airline anymore. It was about breaking cages so that everyone could fly free. The Capitol dome gleamed under a crisp winter sun as Jonathan Pierce prepared to step inside for the most consequential day of his life. Naomi clutched his hand tightly as they walked past a sea of cameras, flashes popping like fireworks. Reporters shouted questions, their voices rising over one another. "Mr. Pierce, will Aerovista survive the audit, Naomi? How do you feel about testifying?" Jonathan shielded her gently, guiding her into the building with Robert Hall at his side. Catherine Doyle was already there, pale but resolute, her prepared remarks trembling in her hand. She gave Jonathan a small nod across the hallway. There was no turning back now. Inside the hearing chamber, lawmakers filled their seats. At the center sat Margaret Klein, representing the auditors, ready to present findings. Mitchell Graves sat a few rows back, his presence a silent threat. He wore a mask of composure, but his eyes never left Jonathan. The committee chair banged a gavel. "This hearing will come to order. Today we address allegations of systemic discrimination within the airline industry, with Aerovista Airlines at the forefront." Catherine testified first. Her voice shook at the beginning, but grew steadier as she spoke. "For years, I enforced policies that singled out Black, Latino, and immigrant passengers for extra scrutiny. We pretended it was about safety. It wasn't. It was prejudice codified in procedure." Gas rippled through the room. Catherine continued, "I failed those passengers. I failed myself. But today, I confess it all so we can build something better." Her words landed like thunder. Even the lawmakers who had entered skeptical leaned forward, struck by her raw honesty. When she stepped away, her shoulders sagged, but her son in the gallery gave her a proud thumbs up. Then it was Jonathan's turn. He rose, steadying himself with a breath. "I am Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Aerovista Airlines. But today, I am also a father. My daughter Naomi was denied her seat in first class because a flight attendant decided she didn't look like she belonged there. That single moment revealed a disease running through our industry, a disease of bias, unchecked, normalized, and hidden." He paused, scanning the room. "We have a choice: to continue pretending these are isolated incidents, or to face the truth discrimination in air travel is systemic. I have opened my company's doors to auditors. We are exposing every failure, no matter how ugly, because passengers do not pay for seats to be humiliated. They pay to be treated with dignity." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Some lawmakers scribbled notes furiously. Others stared, visibly moved. And then Naomi was called. At just 12, she stood before the microphone, her voice soft but unwavering. "When they told me I couldn't sit in first class, I felt small, like I didn't matter. But my dad told me the truth makes us free. That's why I'm here. I don't want anyone else to feel like they don't belong. Everyone should." Her simple words silenced the room. Even Mitchell Graves looked momentarily unsettled. Camera zoomed in on Naomi's young face, her innocence making the injustice all the starker. Afterward, reporters swarmed outside. One shouted, "Mr. Pierce, what do you say to critics who claim you're destroying Aerovista for a crusade?" Jonathan lifted Naomi into his arms and answered calmly, "If building a future where my daughter belongs is a crusade, then I will gladly march it." That evening, the footage played across every network. Catherine's confession, Jonathan's fire. Naomi's quiet courage, it became the story of the year. Passengers across the country shared their own accounts of bias, using the hashtag #MoWEveryOneBelongs. But while public sentiment shifted, the corporate battlefield remained brutal. Atlas Airways issued ads accusing Aerovista of grandstanding. Graves appeared on financial programs, warning investors that sentiment doesn't balance books. Yet even his confident veneer cracked when fresh leaks exposed more discriminatory practices at Atlas. The more he lashed out, the more defensive he appeared. Inside Aerovista, morale began to climb. Employees who once feared the audit now felt pride. Jerome, the veteran attendant, told colleagues, "For the first time in 30 years, I feel like we're serving with purpose, not just paychecks." Still, Jonathan remained cautious. Late at night, he sat with Robert in his office. "We made progress today, but Graves isn't finished. Neither is Richard. They'll double their efforts now." Robert nodded grimly. "Then we stay vigilant. But Jonathan, you've won something bigger already. You've changed the conversation. At home." Naomi snuggled under a blanket, watching the replay of her testimony on TV. "Dad," she whispered, "I wasn't as scared as I thought I'd be. It felt right." Jonathan kissed her forehead. "That's because it was. Truth feels heavy when you carry it alone. But when you share it, it lifts." In a quiet apartment across town, Catherine sat with her son, watching the same broadcast. Tears streamed down her face. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. "We told the truth," she whispered. Her son leaned against her, and for the first time, he believed it too. But in his glass tower in Manhattan, Mitchell Graves stood alone, staring at the skyline. His reflection glared back at him from the window, fractured by the lights of the city. For the first time, he wondered if Jonathan Pierce might not just survive, but win. Snow fell in heavy sheets across Chicago the night Aerovista's fate teetered on the edge. The congressional testimonies had electrified the nation, but they had also cornered Jonathan Pierce into a showdown with his own board. Public sympathy was with him, yet investors grew restless, and the whispers of a coup grew louder with each day. Jonathan sat at his desk long after the building had emptied. Naomi's drawings scattered across the surface planes soaring, birds breaking cages, skies painted with the words, "Everyone belongs." He traced the outlines absently, knowing these simple sketches carried more weight than any quarterly report. They were why he refused to bend. Robert Hall arrived just before midnight, his overcoat dusted with snow. He dropped a folder on Jonathan's desk. "The board is calling for a vote tomorrow. Richard Morrow has the numbers. He's planning to remove you as CEO." Jonathan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "So this is it. The breaking point." Robert's eyes softened. "Not if you make your case directly to them. Some are on the fence. They're frightened, not malicious. If you can remind them why this fight matters, you might still hold your seat." Meanwhile, Richard Morrow was already rallying support in a dimly lit restaurant across town. Several board members sat with him, their voices hushed but firm. "Pierce is destroying shareholder value," Richard argued. "He's turned Aerovista into a political stage. We need stability, and I can deliver it." One director hesitated. "But Richard, the public adores him now. If we oust Pierce, we risk a PR disaster." Richard's lips curled in disdain. "Public adoration doesn't pay bills. I will stabilize this company, and Graves will back us with capital if needed. That's how we survive." What Richard didn't realize was that Mitchell Graves had his own agenda. From his Manhattan office, Graves watched the snow sweep across the skyline, a glass of bourbon in his hand. "Let Morrow oust Pierce," he muttered to himself. Then Aero Vista collapses from within, and Atlas swoops in to pick up the pieces. The next morning, Jonathan stood before the board, the tension in the room palpable. Richard wasted no time. "Mr. Pierce has jeopardized this airline beyond repair. Stockholders are fleeing. Lawsuits multiply daily. For the survival of Aero Vista, I motion to remove him as CEO." Several hands twitched, ready to rise in agreement. But Jonathan spoke first, his voice calm yet commanding. "Before you vote, I want you to remember why Aero Vista exists. Not for numbers on a spreadsheet, but for people, for every passenger who entrusts us with their safety and dignity. We failed them. I won't deny it. But failure does not define us. Change does." He paced slowly, eyes sweeping the table. "You're frightened, I know. But Graves doesn't offer stability. He offers surrender. If we abandon reform now, we hand him our future on a silver platter. Aero Vista will not die because of truth. It will only die if we trade integrity for convenience." The room was silent. Then Everett Lang cleared his throat. "I've seen the reforms in action. I've seen employees renewed with purpose. For the first time in decades, they believe in this company again. I vote to keep Jonathan Pierce." Sandra Lee followed. "I agree. We've weathered storms before, but never with this much conviction. Aero Vista deserves to finish what it started." Slowly, hands shifted. One by one, board members cast their votes. When the tally was read, Jonathan remained CEO by a single vote. Richard's face darkened, his jaw tightening in rage. After the meeting, Robert clapped Jonathan on the shoulder. "You did it. You held the line." But Jonathan knew victory was fragile. Richard stormed from the building, his phone already pressed to his ear. "Mitchell," he hissed, "the board won't listen. We need to force their hand another way. At school." Naomi heard whispers about her father's battle, but instead of shrinking this time, she straightened her back. During art class, she sketched an airplane breaking through a storm cloud, sunlight streaming behind it. When Lila asked what it meant, Naomi smiled faintly. "It means storms don't last forever." That evening, Catherine Doyle appeared on a primetime news show, her voice steady. She said, "I know what it feels like to enforce discrimination, and I know what it feels like to admit it. Pierce isn't destroying Aero Vista. He's saving it from itself, and from people like me who let silence be our shield." Her testimony reached millions, swaying hearts that statistics never could. But the storm was far from over. That same night, Jonathan's security team intercepted another anonymous threat, this one more chilling than the rest. Next time, it won't just be words. Jonathan sat awake in Naomi's room, watching her sleep. Fear gnawed at him, but so did determination. He whispered softly, "They can try to break me, but they won't break us." Across the city, Richard and Graves met in secret. Graves leaned in, his voice low and cold. "If Pierce won't fall from within, we'll push him from the outside. The audit is our weapon now, and when the final report comes, it will bury him." Richard raised his glass, a thin smile on his lips. "Then let's make sure the grave is deep." Jonathan didn't know it yet, but the battle for Aero Vista's soul was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The breaking point had passed. Now came the reckoning. The city awoke to headlines blaring across every screen. Pierce survives coup by a single vote. It was dramatic, even cinematic, and it gave Aerovista a temporary surge of public goodwill. Yet beneath the praise, Jonathan knew a storm was gathering. Richard and Graves were not finished. At Aerovista headquarters, Jonathan convened his executive team in the glass-walled strategy room. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and silent, a stark contrast to the storm inside. "We have a narrow window," Jonathan said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "Graves is moving through back channels. Richard has turned the audit into a weapon. If we don't control the narrative, we'll lose everything." Sandra leaned forward. "What do we need?" "Transparency," Jonathan replied. "We open the books ourselves. Every complaint, every reform measure, every cent spent on training, we make it public before Graves can spin it against us." Robert frowned. "That's risky. We'll be airing dirty laundry." "Better us than them," Jonathan said firmly. "If we don't tell our story, someone else will tell it for us." Meanwhile, Richard met privately with Graves in a sleek Manhattan penthouse. The city lights flickered like stars behind them. Graves poured 2 glasses of bourbon, his voice smooth and calculating. "Pierce's transparency move is desperate. It will expose more than it saves. All we need is one scandal buried in those files, and he's finished." Richard smirked. "I've already instructed my team to comb through the archives. There's something in there. I know it." Back at headquarters, Jonathan's team worked through the night, sorting thousands of documents. Naomi, home with her grandmother, sensed the tension. "At dinner?" she asked softly. "Grandma, why do they want to hurt Daddy if he's trying to do good?" Her grandmother sighed, brushing Naomi's curls gently. "Because sometimes, baby, doing the right thing makes powerful people nervous. But nervous people can't stop the truth." The next day, Jonathan held a press conference. Cameras filled the atrium, reporters leaning forward like hawks. "Today," he began, "Aerovista opens its records to the public. We will not hide from our mistakes. We will not allow fear or profit to dictate who belongs in our skies. This is not weakness. This is strength, the strength to confront the truth." He gestured to the screens behind him. Charts appeared showing reduced complaints, improved employee retention, and rising passenger satisfaction since reforms began. But alongside those were admissions past failures, unresolved cases, and lawsuits still pending. The honesty was raw, almost brutal. Some reporters praised the courage, others pounced. "Mr. Pierce, isn't this proof Aerovista is drowning in discrimination issues? Doesn't this make you vulnerable to take over?" Jonathan held their gaze. "It makes us vulnerable to honesty. But honesty builds trust, and trust will outlast fear." The press conference went viral. Passengers shared their own stories, many painful, but others hopeful, small acts of dignity restored on recent flights. Hashtags trended. "No Aerovista truth." "A sky for all." Public sentiment tilted, if only slightly, in Jonathan's favor. But late that night, Robert burst into Jonathan's office holding a confidential memo. His face was pale. "They found something." Jonathan took the papers. His chest tightened as he read years-old correspondence suggesting that a former Aerovista executive had quietly colluded with Graves on pricing routes, possibly even discrimination protocols designed to protect premium experience. "If this gets out," Robert said grimly, "they'll tie you to it, even if you weren't involved." Jonathan leaned back, exhaustion weighing heavy. "So this is the reckoning." At the same time, Richard met with reporters in secret, leaking fragments of the memo. By dawn, Headlines screamed Aero Vista, colluded with Atlas in discrimination policies. The stock plummeted. Social media lit up with outrage. Hashtags flipped from supportive to accusatory. Naomi overheard at school other children whispering that her father's airline was racist, that maybe he wasn't the hero people thought. She went home in tears, refusing to eat dinner. Jonathan found her curled on her bed, clutching her sketchbook. He sat beside her, his voice soft. "Naomi, look at me. I didn't write those memos. I didn't agree to those things. But they say you knew," she whispered. "They'll say anything to make me fall," he said, brushing her cheek gently. "What matters is the truth, and the people who know me. Know us. Know what we stand for. We keep fighting, not just for me, but for you. For everyone who deserves better." Naomi nodded slowly, her eyes red but steady. "Then I'll keep drawing. I'll keep showing what it looks like when everyone belongs." Her quiet resilience gave Jonathan strength. The next morning, he called an emergency town hall with employees. The room was packed, tension thick. Some looked betrayed, others uncertain. Jonathan stood before them. No script, no slides. "You've seen the headlines. You've heard the accusations. Let me be clear, we'll not lie to you. Mistakes were made. Deals were struck before my time that dishonored everything this company should have stood for. But those days are gone. Aero Vista under my leadership will not collude, will not discriminate, will not compromise dignity for profit." He paused, scanning the room. "If that costs me my job, so be it. But if you believe in this vision, if you've seen the changes in our cabins, if you've felt the difference in how we treat passengers, then stand with me. Together we can outlast this storm." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then, slowly, hands began to rise. Applause grew hesitant at first, then thunderous. Employees stood, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. In that moment, Jonathan knew the fight wasn't over. He wasn't alone. But outside the building, Richard and Graves watched the scene on a live feed. Graves' voice was icy. "He won this round, but the reckoning isn't finished. Tomorrow, we bring Congress into it. Once regulators smell blood, Pierce won't survive." Richard's smile was thin, sharp. "Then tomorrow, we bury him." Jonathan, unaware of the storm yet to come, walked back into his office, Naomi's latest drawing pinned to his wall. A plane soared through clouds, carrying people of every color, every background, together in the sky. It was a child's drawing, but also a vision of what the future could be. He whispered to himself, steady and certain, "They can break my name, but not my purpose." The reckoning had only just begun. Congressional hearings were announced within 48 hours of the leaked memo. The headlines relentless Pierce to face lawmakers over airline collusion. For Jonathan, it felt like a trap perfectly set. Richard and Graves had pushed the pieces forward with precision, and now he was expected to walk into a room filled with cameras, lawmakers, and critics eager to tear him apart. Robert briefed him the night before. The two men sat in Jonathan's office, papers spread across the desk. "They'll press you on the memo. They'll try to tie you personally to decisions made a decade ago." Jonathan leaned forward, weary but resolute. "Then I'll tell the truth. I wasn't in that room. I didn't sign those agreements, and I'll prove it by what we've done since. I won't defend the indefensible. Robert, I'll expose it." Robert's brow furrowed. "That's a risky play." "It's the only play," Jonathan said. Meanwhile, Naomi wrestled with her own storm. She'd overheard classmates mocking her father again, calling him a fraud, saying Aero Vista only pretended to care. At home, she confronted Jonathan quietly. "Daddy, what if they don't believe you? What if they think you're lying?" Jonathan knelt so their eyes met. "Then I'll keep telling the truth until someone listens." Lies spread fast. "Naomi, but the truth endures. It always does." She hugged him tightly, her small arms around his neck. "Then I'll believe for everyone who doesn't." The next morning, the Rayburn House office building in Washington buzzed with anticipation. Reporters crowded the steps, flashes lighting the gray winter sky. Inside, the committee chamber filled with lawmakers, journalists, and advocacy groups. Richard sat in the back, a smug smile plastered across his face. Graves watched from his office, live stream glowing on a massive screen. When Jonathan entered, whispers rippled through the room. He wore a simple navy suit, nothing flashy, a stark contrast to the spectacle around him. Naomi's drawing her airplane through storm cloud was tucked into his briefcase, a quiet talisman. The chairperson, Representative Green, struck the gavel. "This hearing will come to order. Mr. Pierce, you are here to answer questions regarding Aerovista's past collusion with Atlas Airways and allegations of systemic discrimination. Do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do," Jonathan said, voice steady. The questioning began brutally. Lawmakers waved copies of the leaked memo. "Mr. Pierce, did you authorize these policies?" "No," Jonathan replied. "Those agreements were made before my tenure as CEO. Yet you benefited from them." Another pressed. "How can you claim clean hands?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You're right. I inherited a company complicit in shameful practices. I benefited from a system designed to exclude. But the measure of leadership isn't whether you inherit perfection. It's whether you confront imperfection when you find it. That's what we've done at Aerovista." He spoke of reforms, of transparency, of the courage of employees who embrace change. He told the story of Catherine Doyle, who came forward not to defend herself, but to confess. He spoke of passengers like Sarah Chen, whose letters reminded him what was at stake. And, in a moment unscripted, he spoke of Naomi. "My daughter once asked me why people wanted to hurt me for doing good. The truth is, powerful people profit from injustice, and justice threatens their power. But I promised her, and I promise you now, Aerovista will not return to silence, no matter the cost." The room grew quiet. Even the committee members shifted, the rehearsed aggression in their faces softening into something more uncertain. Then, Representative Williams, a black woman known for her sharp questioning, leaned forward. "Mr. Pierce, if you had the chance to do it again, knowing the personal cost, the threats, the losses, the attacks, would you still choose this path?" Jonathan didn't hesitate. "Yes, because dignity isn't optional. It's the foundation of every human journey. And if an airline can't honor that at 30,000 feet, then it doesn't deserve to exist." Gas filled the chamber. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even Richard, sitting in the back, felt the weight of those words. After hours of testimony, Jonathan left the chamber exhausted but standing tall. Outside, cameras swarmed him. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Pierce, are you worried about Aerovista's future?" Jonathan stopped, looked directly into the lenses. "I'm not worried about Aerovista's future. I'm worried about our country's future if we accept discrimination as normal. That's the real flight we're on, and it's one we can't afford to crash." The clip spread instantly, viewed millions of times within hours. Hashtags flipped once again. Pierce Truth trended worldwide. Back in New York, Graves slammed his glass against the table, bourbon spilling. He turned it around. Again. How does he keep doing this? Richard's expression hardened. Then we push harder. If Congress won't bury him, the market will. But for Aero Vista employees, something had shifted. At the training center, crews replayed Jonathan's testimony on a projector. Many wiped tears from their eyes. "He's fighting for us," one attendant whispered. "The least we can do is fight with him." That night, Jonathan returned home to Naomi, who ran into his arms. "Did they believe you?" she asked breathlessly. Jonathan kissed the top of her head. "Some did, some didn't. But we planted something bigger than belief. We planted hope." And as he tucked her into bed, he knew tomorrow would bring new battles lawsuits, market swings, maybe even betrayals. But tonight, for the first time in months, Jonathan allowed himself to breathe, because the truth had spoken, and it had not been silenced. The reckoning was not the end. It was the beginning of the last stand. The days following Jonathan's testimony were a blur of chaos and clarity. Stock analysts debated whether Aero Vista was headed for collapse or rebirth. Newspapers ran dueling headlines: "Pierce saves Airline with emotional testimony," alongside "Doubts remain over Aero Vista's future." Investors were jittery, but the public pulse was unmistakable. For the first time, Aero Vista was being spoken of not as a scandal-ridden company, but as a symbol of change. Inside headquarters, employees carried themselves differently, where fear once clouded their eyes. There was now a spark of defiance, a sense that they were part of something larger. Catherine Doyle, now an advisor to the reform program, stood in a training room with new recruits. "Don't let the uniform trick you," she told them. "This job isn't just about safety and service, it's about dignity. If you forget that, you've forgotten everything." Jonathan, however, knew the fight was not yet won. Robert Hall entered his office with a grim expression. "Graves has unleashed a coordinated attack. Atlas is slashing fares on key routes, undercutting us by nearly 40%. They're betting we can't sustain reforms and stay profitable." Jonathan looked out at the runways, planes taking off into the winter sky. "Then we don't just sustain, we innovate. If they want a price war, we'll win a loyalty war. People will pay more for respect if we prove it's real." Sandra Lee suggested a bold move launching the Sky for All initiative, a nationwide campaign inviting passengers to share their experiences, good and Bedan Aero Vista flights, with responses published publicly and actions taken in real time. It was risky, but it embodied transparency. Jonathan approved it without hesitation. Within days, stories poured in. Some were painful, accounts of bias that still slipped through cracks, but many were transformative. A black veteran who had once been humiliated on a flight wrote, "For the first time, I felt like I belonged in the cabin. Not tolerated, but welcomed." A young Muslim woman posted a video of an attendant defending her right to pray quietly mid-flight. The campaign went viral, not polished but raw, the unfiltered voices of passengers resonating far louder than corporate spin. Meanwhile, Naomi became an unexpected ambassador. One of her drawings had been photographed by an employee and shared online a plane filled with passengers of every race, holding hands as they soared through the sky. The caption read, "Naomi's vision of flight." Within hours, it spread worldwide, inspiring thousands of reposts and even becoming a mural on the side of Aero Vista's training center. Jonathan watched the mural's unveiling with Naomi by his side. She clutched his hand, whispering, "Daddy, they liked my picture." "They didn't just like it," Jonathan said softly. "They believed in it. You showed them the future." But Richard Morrow was not finished. Humiliated by Jonathan's survival, he doubled down. He met Graves in a shadowed Manhattan club, his voice tight with rage. Pierce is winning hearts, but hearts don't pay bills. If we force a liquidity crisis, Aerovista collapses no matter how many murals they paint. Graves nodded, his eyes cold. Then we bleed them dry, quietly. Investors are fickle. Fear is our sharpest tool. Soon, rumors flooded the market Aerovista couldn't cover debts. Aerovista's reforms were unsustainable. Aerovista's leadership was fractured. The stock dipped again. Employees worried. Passengers hesitated. Creditors called. Jonathan gathered his team in the crisis room. This is it, their last stand, and ours. If we survive this storm, we'll be stronger than ever. If we don't, at least the world will know we tried. Robert leaned forward. Then we need a counterstrike. Not just defense, but something that shows we're not afraid. That night, Jonathan drafted a letter, not to investors or regulators, but to every Aerovista employee and passenger. It read, "We are not perfect. We never claimed to be. But perfection was never our goal. Progress was. Every flight, every passenger, every story matters. If you've flown with us, you are part of this family. If you've been wronged, we will make it right. If you believe dignity belongs in the sky, then you are Aerovista. And together, we cannot be grounded." The letter was posted online. Within hours, it was everywhere, retweeted by celebrities, endorsed by advocacy groups, praised by pastors and professors. Passengers posted photos wearing Aerovista pins and hats, calling themselves the sky for all generation. Investors who had once wavered began to reconsider. Pacific Capital renewed its backing, citing the undeniable market power of conscience-driven consumers. Other funds followed. The liquidity crisis fizzled. On the eve of Aerovista's annual shareholders' meeting, Jonathan stood backstage, Naomi's hand in his heart steady. "Remember," he told her, "no matter what happens, we already changed something bigger than a company. We changed what people believe is possible." She smiled, eyes shining. "Then tomorrow, we show them it can last." The next morning, the shareholder vote was held in a massive hall. Richard Morrow made his final plea to abandon reforms, warning of bankruptcy. Graves loomed in the background, a silent shadow. Then Jonathan stepped forward. His speech was simple, unpolished, but powerful. "Some of you came here to protect your wealth. Others came here to protect your legacy. I came here to protect dignity. And I will tell you this dignity has value. It cannot be shorted, cannot be sold, cannot be stolen. We are not just running an airline. We are building trust. And trust will outlast profit every time." When the votes were counted, Aerovista shareholders chose Jonathan by a decisive margin. Richard's face fell. Graves left the hall without a word. That evening, as the sun set over the runways, Jonathan and Naomi watched a plane lift into the sky. Its side bore a new slogan, painted in bold letters. "The sky for all," Naomi whispered. "It's really happening." Jonathan nodded, his eyes misting. It's just beginning. At its heart, this story is not just about one girl being denied a seat in first class. It's about what happens when dignity is challenged and someone chooses to fight back. Life constantly presents us with moments of injustice, sometimes loud and obvious, sometimes subtle and hidden. In those moments, the easiest thing to do is to stay silent, but silence allows injustice to grow. Jonathan Pierce's journey reminds us that integrity requires action, even when it costs us. He could have protected his reputation quietly, but instead, he chose to expose the truth, risk humiliation, and confront the system that allowed discrimination to thrive. That courage transformed not only an airline, but also the people who flew with it and worked within it. For us, the lesson is clear: dignity is not optional. Whether we are parents, workers, neighbors, or leaders, we have the power to demand respect and to offer it. True change begins in the small choices we make, speaking up when others are silent, standing firm when others waver. Justice may not come quickly, but when it does, it heals more than one wound. It restores hope for everyone watching. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Your support means the world. It's what allows us to keep telling stories that inspire and challenge. If this story touched you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep shining a light on stories that remind us of the power of dignity, justice, and hope